My Govanen, this is the Tolkien Share talking, and Season 2 of The Rings of Power is upon us. And it is terrible. I know what I put in the title, and it is true. There is one scene that destroys the entire plot of The Lord of the Rings. If you can't withhold your curiosity, here is the timestamp where I discuss it. But there's much to be dissected on the way, so make sure to watch the whole thing. Let's go! Firstly, let's summarize what we know already. Our protagonist is Galadriel, who, if we ignore her suicidal actions and genocidal tendencies, is the sweetest person you will ever meet.
Who is this mortal who speaks to me as if he has the slightest idea who I am?
Having brought proof that Sauron is still in Middle-earth, she is sent away to Valinor because the High King believes that by seeking Sauron she will bring him to life, or something. At the same time, we learn that the king is aware that the light of the elves is fading and that they have around a year to live on Middle-earth, and that if they leave, the world will be conquered by darkness. The king sends Elrond to Khazad-dûm, hoping that he will discover Mithril, which might be the answer to the elves' problems, but doesn't inform Elrond about the true goal of his mission. At the same time, he recalls all the outposts in the Southlands, claiming that the time of war is over. As it turns out, it is literally their worst time to do so, as the Southlands are invaded by an Orcish army. Fortunately for the Orcs, nobody seems to care. During her journey to Valinor, Galadriel decides that the best course of action is to jump off her ship and to swim approximately 4,000 miles back to Middle-earth. By the power of being a protagonist, she then meets not one but two vessels that ultimately bring her to Númenor. Notably, she happens to become acquainted with Sauron, the Lord of Darkness, on one of the vessels. Númenor happens to be the exact place she needed to be to discover that she should have looked at maps more often, because now she deciphers Sauron's plan to invade the Southlands. Moreover, she concludes that Halbrand, Sauron in disguise, is an heir to the throne of the Southlands. By demeaning the whole nation of Númenor, stealing documents, insulting the Queen Regent, breaking out of prison, and breaking into the chambers of the Old King, Galadriel gathers so much sympathy that she almost convinces the Queen to send an army to the Southlands, but she fails. We must also assume that she forgot that she is a commander of the Northern armies and that she can master enough elves to solve the problem. By the power of literal Deus Ex Machina, Queen Regent Miriel receives a signal from the Valar and decides to send 500 men on 5 ships. Later it turns out that those soldiers are literally taken from the streets and have no military training, beside 10 days of exercise on the said streets. It seems that after the sabotage of 2 ships, Númenor has only 3 available vessels, which is very impressive for a seafaring nation. Elsewhere, Elrond discovers that dwarves are mining Mithril, but then swears to never reveal that. Later, speaking to the king, he reveals that dwarves are mining Mithril, and later we learn that he shared the secret with Celebrimbor as well. Eventually, the old dwarven king refuses to help elves because he doesn't want to interfere with the greater powers. In the Southlands, the Southlanders are attacked by orcs and gather at the old watchtower but forget to bring any food with them. Arondir, Fio and Bronwyn, wearing a thick layer of plot armor, join them in the tower but decide to leave it for the sake of a better fortress, a village. Then they are almost defeated, who could have seen that coming, but then, luckily, the Númenorians come. It is indeed lucky, because they would have to have read the script to know where to go, and also to defy all the rules of time and space to arrive in time. Unfortunately for the protagonist, a sword that Theo found is a key to activating Mount Doom, and nobody cares to check if they still have it. Consequently, all the Southlands are covered in fire and deadly smoke, and the shockwave reaches the village and leaves nothing but ashes. Everybody dies. The end. Would be the words of anybody who hasn't realized yet that some of our heroes have names, so they cannot die. Númenorians and Southlanders retreat to the camp that the Númenorians pull up from their arsenal. Wounded Halbrand is so wounded that he needs to ride on a horse for 6 days with no stop in order to be healed. Then, after he recovers, he teaches Celebrimbor that metals can be alloyed and that will somehow strengthen the power of this one bit of Mithril that they have. Celebrimbor starts forging the rings that will save us from this grave problem from which every elf suffers, as their literal life force is fading, which are explicitly shown in the scenes that I will present to you now. But then Galadriel discovers that Halbrand is not the king of the Southlands, and then he decides to reveal his true nature as Sauron, even though nobody would figure that out. Apparently he can trap Galadriel in her own mind and do to her whatever he wants. So he leaves. Then Galadriel informs no one that the very idea of creating the rings comes from the guy whose aliases are the Nameless, the Dark Lord and Mr. Evil Incarnate. So the rings are forged. I should also mention that some hobbits meet Gandalf, who goes on a deep spiritual journey that teaches him that he is in fact good.
I'm good.
Alright, What a glorious mess! Now, on to Season 2, but first, few remarks at the beginning. I'll try to judge the show on its own merits. From time to time, however, I'll refer to the source material, that is, Tolkien's works. The creators of the show may not have all the rights to use these materials fully, but they can respect them and their spirit, so I'll judge them on that. So, for example, they might be legally forbidden to use the name Gandalf, but they may portray his character nevertheless. I have no such legal restrictions, so I'll use his name and any other freely. There are of course some deeper elements of the story, which I will refer to as well. Whenever I do that, I'll mark that by this sign at the bottom of the screen. Whenever it appears, it means that I am not assessing the show as a separate entity, but as an adaptation. Long story short, if you are not interested in the source material and the show's relation to it, you may skip these parts. The criticism present there should not affect the judgment of other elements. One more thing, in order to summarize what we know about the characters we see, I'll be using these neat character sheets like the one you see on the screen right now. They have been all somewhat filled in with the most crucial information from Season 1. Alright, now we can begin. Episode 1 starts with a flashback in which Sauron tells Orcs... Oh, sorry, I spelled the audience wrong, Orcs must have known this already, that Morgoth is gone and that he will rule in his stead. He says that many Orcs will die, good strategy, I wonder if it pays off, and reveals his new plan to enslave the peoples of Middle-earth through the power over the flesh and to heal Middle-earth. Why is he telling the Orcs, his slaves, his plan? I don't know. And call me crazy, but those two ideas of ruling and healing seem contradictory. I think that the Rings of Power is trying to play with this idea of Sauron's plan and him having apparently both good and bad intentions, unless in his mind ruling equals healing. Well, I guess we don't know yet. When, or rather if, the specifics of his plan are revealed, we'll discuss them more thoroughly. Now comes the time to the first reference to the source material. Sauron in the Silmarillion indeed claimed to have changed and to repent, but he did so only before the Valar in order to escape the same punishment as Morgoth. But now, in the Rings of Power, it seems that he indeed changed and wants to convince the Orcs that he intends to heal Middle-earth. Then Sauron informs the Orcs that they have nowhere to go as everyone will hate them and nobody will forgive them, so they must follow him. This begs the question of the volition of the Orcs, because Sauron speaks as if they have a choice. This is substantial. Up to this point, nothing indicated that Orcs can decide whether to repent or follow Morgoth or his successors. This is true for the entire The Lord of the Rings trilogy, the Hobbit films and Season 1 of the show. The lack of moral choice made Orcs both formidable, as they never questioned their orders, as well as, let's say, expendable for the sake of the plot. What I mean is that never across all the stories from Middle-earth have I felt badly about someone killing an Orc. They are either corrupt to the core, simply evil, or so bereft of choice that they are only slaves, have no moral responsibility and cannot be judged just like animals. But from the perspective of the show, Season 2 at least, it now seems that we shouldn't be so quick in our judgment. It is not necessarily a problem, many stories rely on moral complexity. Tolkien himself wasn't decided on the exact nature and origin of the Orcs, and in light of many of his notes and ideas, their moral responsibility is debatable. But the show goes a step further. Now it is not just a theoretical possibility under some ideal circumstances. At any point, any Orc can decide to ask for forgiveness and repent, and seemingly they were close to doing that just now. So now we introduce moral complexity for the evil beasts that up to this point were slain with no remorse. Introducing the possibility of free will for the Orcs is a very shaky ground. We'll see where and how far the show will go with that. Let's go back to the scene. Adar starts Sauron's coronation, but it is in fact an assassination attempt. He stabs Sauron in the neck with the pointy crown, and then many Orcs pierce him as well with their weapons. But for a while he seems generally fine as he fights back. It appears that he is impervious to damage that would be lethal for others. He has also extraordinary strength and tosses Orcs like ragdolls. But then they stab him a bit more, and that seems to do the job as he disappears in a sudden release of energy that freezes the entire region of Forodwaith. He has apparently died, and others believe that he has in fact killed Sauron seems justified. Adar then takes the crown and declares that Orcs are free. Then we see Sauron's blood dripping down into a puddle in a cave. Then after some time a rat comes and black something, whatever it is that you see on the screen, consumes it, revealing that Sauron is in fact alive in some form of a slimy monstrosity. It appears that he cannot yet take another form and that his vitality is in some way tied to his blood. We see the slime consume another creature and slowly, presumably after a long time, crawling out of the cave and taking a form that more and more resembles a humanoid. Then it eats a woman and can finally take the form that we know, Halbrand's. During these scenes there happens something that wasn't so frequent so far. I noticed the music and I liked how it influenced the scene. The choir is ominous and sings in black speech, creating a fitting climate for the character. This ultimately has no impact on the story, but I wanted to point out what I consider to be good, and there is not much more of that where we are heading. Then Halbrand meets some refugees from the Southlands. This means that in his meeting with Galadriel, he partially told the truth. The people he met were running from the Orcs. However, this creates an issue we'll discuss in a moment. A man with the crest of long-dead kings of the Southlands seems to convince Halbrand that he can find another life across the sea, presumably in Númenor. This creates another issue, but I like the lesson that he tries to teach Halbrand that everyone can go towards goodness. I only wish that the show followed that principle. Now, onto the issues. Firstly, time and space. In the first season, nobody mentions the attacks except Halbrand, but the news should have reached the Elves and other Southlanders, especially that there were refugees who escaped. What's more, Halbrand points out the exact place where the attacks happened, and it is because of his directions that Númenóreans arrive in time, after they teleport across the sea of course. But Halbrand was never there to witness the attacks. Secondly, Halbrand's motivation remains unclear. The scene is supposed to explain his change of heart, but are we really to believe that he resigned from being evil because he met one man who told him to do better? Halbrand's plans and motives remain convoluted and unclear, so the scene does not achieve its purpose. Also, what are the chances that Halbrand met the only person that wore a symbol of a king that died 1,000 years ago, which will allow him to execute all the further plans and will cause Galadriel to believe him to be the true king of the Southlands? Well, apparently pretty high. Then we see the refugees and Halbrand on a ship. Apparently Halbrand is haunted by nightmares. As the old man sees that, we get more of him convincing Halbrand that he can be good and do good. Then the worm attacks and Halbrand tells the old man to grab onto something. This suggests that he cares for him, but a moment later he doesn't save him and takes the crest for himself. The ship is destroyed and most of the refugees die, but Halbrand is spared by the beast, possibly because he used some dark magic on it. Then we see the scene from the first season of him meeting Galadriel for the first time. With that, the flashback ends and the title card appears. The music that they use for the title card is cool. Yeah, scraping the barrel here. Alright, so Sauron is a shapeshifter, he's extremely hard to kill, and seemingly considers being good, and reads the script. Ada hates Sauron, cares for the Orcs, and that's it. Hey, what's that doing here? Back to the present times, we see Galadriel chasing Elrond, who is riding away with a pouch containing the 3 rings. Then suddenly Galadriel is stopped by some guards and led to Gil-galad and Elrond. What had happened before we will never learn, and we could have cut to the discussion that happens next without the chasing scene, but well. The king questions Galadriel about Halbrand. We may recall that Halbrand left the scroll containing information about him not having the rights to the throne, and Elrond found it. Galadriel now has another opportunity to tell the elves that the 3 rings that are supposed to help them were created by Mr. Dark Lord himself. And she does so. Which begs the question, why didn't she do so before the rings were ever created? Why now? What changed? It seems that only the questioning by the king prompts her to do so, and that leads to the conclusion that she wanted to keep that information to herself, which is yet another argument for how great a character she is. The king's reaction to that information is see for yourselves. It is bizarre. Elrond's reaction is far more understandable as he starts blaming Galadriel, who in turn blames him for not getting Mithril from the dwarves. They are very much not on an even ground, as one failed at negotiations, while the other allowed their mortal enemy to come to them and possibly corrupt the artifacts that were meant to save the entire elven race, and once she discovered it, she told no one and allowed the rings to be crafted. By the way, the fact that Galadriel was hiding the truth is never acknowledged. Upon learning that the most evil being in Middle-earth was directly involved with the creation of the rings, Gil-galad promptly claims that the rings have to be used as they are the last chance of the elves to remain in Middle-earth. Galadriel agrees with that assessment, and only Elrond shows enough reason to call it absurd. The conflict that we observe suffers from the improper setup. First of all, the elves having to leave Middle-earth is a concept we are only told of and never shown except for some sickness on a tree. Thus, it is very hard to accept the very premise. Then there is the assumption that only the rings can help the elves. But it is not so. It is mithril which is essential to their survival, and it is the dwarves that have mithril. There is still hope to convince them. Maybe in wake of the revelation that Sauron has returned, the old king will be less eager to allow his potential allies to disappear. And if he doesn't accept, there are other means of obtaining the precious metal. Elves can threaten war. If their survival depends on it, they can fight, but this possibility is never discussed. And it definitely should have been already in the first season, and even more now. So, clearly, using the device that their greatest enemy had weeks to interfere with is not the only hope for the elves. But other options are never mentioned. So, seeing that the king has apparently lost his mind, Elrond jumps down a waterfall with the rings. As we will see shortly, Elrond survives the fall without a scratch, thus leaving the diminishing ranks of the characters of the show who don't have immense plot armor. Now, Galadriel wants to cover up her own mistakes. Gil-galad wants to risk fulfilling Sauron's plans. And Elrond is reasonable and stubborn. We move to Mordor, where Sauron, in the form of Halbrand, seemingly allowed orcs to capture him. With other slaves he's led before Ada. Then Halbrand, I will refer to him as such as long as he doesn't reveal his identity, tells Ada that elves are in alliance with Sauron and have crafted artifacts that rule over the flesh. In turn for releasing the people of the Southlands, Halbrand offers to tell Ada where Sauron is. I don't know what he intended or expected, but basically everyone could see where this was going. To no one's surprise, Ada orders to torture Halbrand in order to get out the information this way. Next, we see Gandalf and Nori traveling through a desert. Gandalf has some strange dreams about his past. They have no food, and they are running in circles as they have lost their way. So Nori asks Gandalf to cast a spell and magic some fruits out of the dead trees that they encounter on their path. I'm glad to see Gandalf use his powers according to the current need, although I don't know why he hasn't used them already. Notably, Gandalf seems to be much more eloquent than before. As he uses a magic spell, he also seems to be much more in control of his powers than before. But then the tree explodes. There is no fruit, but some cockroaches run out. Seemingly it is Nori's favorite food. Later at night we get a bit of character. Nori misses home, and Gandalf consoles her, giving her one of the few lines that I really like in the show.
Strange how that which is left behind can be the heaviest burden to carry.
However, Nori missing home would be a classical and understandable characteristic in a normal show, but here we must be reminded that she misses a bunch of sadists who were happy to leave her family behind in the wilderness. Gandalf responds that he misses home as well, despite not knowing it. He only recalls a glimmer of a vision of it, and he can't even name what he exactly feels, but it is a longing that he experiences nevertheless. This part I like as well. Alright, enough of the good stuff. Seeing a different fire in the distance, Gandalf concludes that they are being followed, which is, well, quite outstanding. He might be cautious, of course, but where I come from, those who follow you don't make it abundantly clear by setting a fire for you to notice, especially when they know that you can see them. Alright, Gandalf misses home and is paranoid, and Nori misses home as well. Then we visit Mordor for a short while, where Waldreg tortures Halbrand, who threatens to kill him once he is released. Waldreg tells him that Ada doesn't even remember that Halbrand is there, which is very strange as he is the one who can have vital information about Ada's arch-enemy. Then, left alone, Halbrand tames a beast that is kept there to taunt him, using black speech. We cut to Elrond, who hides under a bridge near the Grey Havens. Then we see Círdan the shipwright. We see this character for the first time, and I should mention that he has a beard. And this is not a criticism. He is the only elf in the Lord of the Rings that is described to have a beard, and I am glad to see this detail added. We observe him at work where he instructs other shipwrights. He seems calm and encouraging. We hear that he knows Valinor and believes that true perfection can be found only there. Then we see him on his own, looking to the west. We also hear the theme of Valinor that was there in the first episode of Season 1. Again, I like that. After the nightfall, Elrond meets with Círdan in secret and explains to him the problem of the rings. Then we see Gil-galad sending a message to Celebrimbor about the true identity of Halbrand. I suppose that this message will never reach Eregion, allowing Celebrimbor to be none the wiser. If that proves true, then Galadriel would be again responsible because she could have told everyone about Sauron a long time ago. Then Gil-galad has a little chat with Galadriel and accuses her of intentionally saving the life of the Dark Lord. This is slightly unreasonable, but I mostly want to focus your attention on the fact that Gil-galad is not very fond of Galadriel and believes her to be at fault. This will become relevant later. Then Gil-galad receives a report that Elrond was not found and he might be dead. But Galadriel assures the soldiers that Elrond still lives. How does she know that? Silly question. She has been consistently shown to have the power of reading the script ahead, so I don't know why anyone would complain. And if that's not enough, she uses her powers once more to deduce that Elrond would seek the help of Círdan. Then we see Círdan and Elrond discussing the problem of the rings. Now, the show is trying to convince us that Sauron has not in fact touched the rings, and that makes them safe to use. I believe that it is done in order to satisfy the fans who remember that this was a unique trait of the Elven rings, that they were never touched by the hand of the enemy, yet they were still under the control of the One. I believe that the show is fighting a lost cause here because it is fighting against itself. It tries to follow the books, but it has already introduced something that goes in a different direction. It has already been established that Sauron's plan is to master the power from the unseen world and to create the power over the flesh. Although we haven't been exactly explained what that means, it was confirmed that the three have those very properties. So it is not the touch of Sauron that plays a role here, but the purpose of the rings and the very power we are told they control. It is this power that was sought by Sauron, and the elves know that. From what the show has established, I see no explanation for trusting the rings. Sauron's touch is of no importance, as the elves know that the rings themselves are Sauron's design. Círdan asks Elrond if he is ready to doom the elves and force them to leave Middle-earth. He answers yes if the alternative is to fall prey to Sauron's plans. This makes Elrond 10 times more sensible than Galadriel and Gil-galad. Seemingly convinced, Círdan tells Elrond that there is a chasm in the depths of the sea where he can cast the rings without the danger of them being ever found again. This is quite fortunate, unlike the sudden arrival of King's soldiers who interrupt Círdan before he explains where this place can be found. It turns out that both Galadriel and Gil-galad came to the Havens personally. I find it quite amusing, but not as much as the fact that Galadriel asks the king to let her speak to Elrond before he is apprehended. The absurdity of this situation comes from her absolute certainty that Elrond will be there. She once again shows her insane powers of reading the script because she cannot otherwise know that she will find Elrond. He might have never come to Círdan, he might have not yet come, he might have already left, but she speaks as if she was sure that she will find him. What's more, she and the king came to Círdan's workshop, again displaying extreme awareness of Elrond's whereabouts. What if he was talking to Círdan in his house or by the shore? But what am I saying? Galadriel would have of course located them there as well. Galadriel finds Elrond in the workshop and tells him to turn himself in unless he wants to be taken by force. Círdan and the rings are nowhere to be found, so of course Elrond is stalling for time when Círdan goes to the chasm he described. But Galadriel seems oblivious to the fact that Elrond is sitting there alone. She then provides her best argument for the use of the 3 rings.
Because in my heart, I know the 3 rings are free of his influence.
And honestly, knowing her powers of reading the script, I suspect that she is right, because Galadriel is like the sea, she's always right. But Elrond is more skeptical, which makes him, again, reasonable, because he is not ready to entrust the fate of the whole Middle-earth to Galadriel's feelings. Then Elrond implies that Galadriel does not have the time she thinks she has, which makes her realize that Círdan is not there. This exchange gives us 2 issues. Firstly, Elrond didn't need to reveal his little intrigue. Secondly, Círdan left the workshop unnoticed by the guards, by Galadriel and by the king, who are there specifically looking for him and Elrond. Despite their presence, he managed to board the boat and left without being noticed. What's more, nobody chases him, and both Galadriel and the king consider the rings gone. Alright, but these were only minor issues compared to the sheer careless incompetence that is the introduction of the very idea of a chasm that can be used to get rid of the Rings of Power. This idea is exactly what breaks the Lord of the Rings. The plot of the Lord of the Rings and the chasm to which Círdan is taking the 3 elven rings to dispose of them cannot coexist. Why? Well, let me ask you, which is easier? To go to the land of fire, ash and death, right under the eye of Sauron, and to throw the one ring into Mount Doom, or to throw it into a chasm that is right at your doorstep? In the books there is a reason why they don't throw the ring into the sea. The sea is treacherous, and there are many beings that live there which may take the ring back. But apparently this hole we are discussing here reaches so far that nothing can be taken back from there, and Elrond considers throwing the rings there to be equivalent to destroying them. This is the same Elrond who explains in the Fellowship of the Ring that the ring has to be taken to Mordor and that no other solution exists. With this chasm, the Lord of the Rings makes no sense. The whole journey is unnecessary. They could have simply thrown the ring into this endless pit where it would never be found. This is the highest form of incompetence. In order to justify a little bit of drama, the show introduced a solution to all the problems with the One Ring. If it isn't addressed, this could be one single most influential flaw in the entire series, and I would like to remind you that it has to compete with the creation of Mordor and Galadriel taking a volcano eruption to the face. Alright, so Elrond. He trusts Círdan, he's ready to leave Middle-earth if it means interrupting Sauron's plans. Círdan, he's calm, he's wise, and apparently he can turn himself invisible. Now Gil-galad, he doesn't trust Galadriel, and Galadriel. She has the power to see the future, she planted a tracking device on Elrond, and she's still an amazing negotiator. Now, in some other parts of Middle-earth, we see Gandalf and Nori who set up a trap for the person who is following them. The trap consists of a rope spread between 2 pieces of rock, which is very easy to notice. So, as far as I am concerned, the person that tripped on that piece of contrivance was in fact hit in the face with the script and fell to the ground only because of that. The trap of course works. As Gandalf and Nori come closer, it turns out that it is Poppy who has been following them. Oh, Poppy, what are you doing here? I have recently watched Random Film Talk's review of Season 1, and he pointed out that Poppy had no reason to stay with the hobbits, and many reasons to join Gandalf and Nori. Now it seems that the writers realized that themselves, but they wanted to make a cheap, surprising review. In true Rings of Power fashion, it doesn't make sense, because there is no way that Poppy tracked them down through the desert, that she gave them no signal that it is her, and that Nori didn't notice that the figure she threw her rag on is suspiciously similar to her best friend. Now, Poppy brings our characters essential information. Apparently, the hobbits had traveled through this land a long time before, and they used a song not to get lost, and it is the same song that Poppy sang in Season 1. Of course, the song could be interpreted in many ways and does not give clear directions, but never mind, keep on singing. Of course, they get through the desert without any trouble. After this silliness, we see them arrive in the land of Rhûn. They are followed by mysterious masked people with a symbol similar to the Eye of Sauron. Then, on the sea, we see Círdan, presumably above the chasm that can destroy the entire plot of the Lord of the Rings. He is about to throw the 3 elven rings there, but a wave shakes his boat and he lets go of the pouch. As he grabs it back, he is visibly tempted to look inside. And we cut to the next scene. Then we see Ada, who is talking with Halbrand and telling him about being chosen by Morgoth to be blessed with power and meeting Sauron for the first time. Halbrand cries for some reason. Then Ada tells Halbrand that his people, meaning the Southlanders, were set free and demands that he tells him everything he knows about Sauron. If Halbrand truly cared about his people, he should have demanded here to see the proof that they are free. If he only pretended, he should do that as well. He has no reason to take Ada's word on it, but this never crosses Halbrand's mind and he proceeds to explain to Ada that Sauron has taken on a new form, one that he doesn't know. Then Halbrand asks Ada to release him so that he can use the trust he has gained among the elves and find Sauron. This story seems very believable. Trust me bro, this mortal enemy of yours is totally in cahoots with the elves, I'll find him, just release me. So Ada of course accepts it and promises to release Halbrand once he swears fealty to him. Halbrand then vows to serve the Lord of Mordor without naming him, which is not at all suspicious, and he is set free. As he leaves Mordor, we see that he was able to somehow release the beast that was in his cell. Of course he did it off screen, because otherwise it would be clear that it was impossible. The beast attacks Waldrek and he probably dies. So let's summarize Sauron's recent moves. He turned himself in to Ada in order to release the Southlanders, but he never checked on them. Then he tried to convince Ada that elves are allied to Sauron of all beings, and then he asked to be released to go to Eregion. So my best faith interpretation is that he wants to sell this story to Celebrimbor and make it somewhat true. But it still doesn't make any sense. Why not go to Eregion in the first place? Why risk being killed? Why risk torture? Why risk being imprisoned for who knows how long? Great questions! Moving on, then there's a... Alright, Halbrand. Cunning, vengeful, insane. Ada, gullible. Moving on, then there is a gathering of the elves and Gil-galad sings them a song of the departure from Middle-earth and the end of the Age of the Elves. I like the song, but the figure of the king singing at a formal occasion seems somewhat strange, but that's just my preference. I appreciate the scene nevertheless. Then the king announces that the time of the elves has ended. I once again remind you that the only signifier of that is the tree that lost its leaves. But then Círdan arrives, and he declares that he has found perfection outside of Valinor in the form of the 3 rings that he has brought with him. Before we move on, let me point your attention to the fact that apparently a random wave changed the fate of the entire elven race because Círdan was ready to throw the rings away and only the sea stopped him. But the sea is always right, I guess? Seeing that his plan failed, Elrond shouts no, and the king, surprised, drops 2 of the rings. Galadriel picks one up, Gil-galad the other, and Círdan already has one, and apparently that's how it is decided who will have the rings. By chance. I would like to remind you that Gil-galad was furious at Galadriel. Now I bet he will never mention that again, and everybody will accept that the rings belong to those who wear them currently. Amazingly, the rings work immediately after they are put on. The magical tree is restored and starts pulsating with light. It apparently means that all the elves are alright. Why does it work that way? What exactly happened? How long will it last? Can they take the rings off now? My guess is that we'll never know. So now we learn that Gil-galad trusts Galadriel, and Círdan is susceptible to the power of the rings. Oh yeah, and the crucial character that intervenes to keep the rings in the story, of course. Now we move to Eregion, where Celebrimbor observes the arrival of Halbrand. Apparently, Halbrand was able to reach his destination faster than the messenger from Lindon. And that's how the episode ends. Let's quickly summarize the storylines of episode 1. Gandalf, Nori, and then suddenly Poppy walk through a desert. There is no much of substance there, so that was mostly a waste of time. Sauron has some insane plans that make no sense, so his plot thread is a waste of time as well. Finally, Galadriel tells everyone about Sauron when it's too late. Elrond shows some surprising sensibility and tries to destroy the rings, but the sea stops him. In the end, Galadriel is allowed to take one of the rings despite her transgressions, and the elves are saved. Notably, the show still seems allergic to any indicators of time and space. We have no idea how much time has passed and how much distance our characters traveled. What is there to praise? I can appreciate the character work between Nori and Gandalf at one moment, Elrond's reasonability, and Círdan's characterization. When it comes to other praiseworthy elements, most of them are musical. You know what? I have an idea for Amazon. Ditch the attempts at creating a coherent story, as you seem incapable of doing so, and make a documentary on the music of Middle-earth. This seems far more within your reach, and I'll be the first to watch it. Alright, so that's it for my review of episode 1. I intend to do a review for each of the episodes, and that of course will take time, and then finally, as we reach the end of the whole season, we'll do a grand review of the whole season and compare it to the previous one, and we'll analyze the story arcs, character arcs, and everything, and hopefully we'll reach some productive conclusions. Now, thank you for listening. I hope to see you again very soon. Fare you well, Novaya. Notably, she happens to become acquainted with Sauron the Lord of Darkness. Orcs can decide whether to repent or follow Morgoth or his successors. Alright, it's ringing time. But a minute later he doesn't him help him torture Halbrand and get out this and For a short while we visit Mordor, where Waldreg tortuses.
Subscribe right now, you little hobbitses.